Today, Nate is barely remembered in modern American culture, except among one group, die-hard freedom-loving Westerners. To them, he's like William Wallace with a six-shooter. And a big part of Champion's mystique has to deal with his role in not one, but two legendary gunfights. Okay, that's actually the beginning of Silverado. Really good movie if you've never seen it. And now Nate's story is even crazier. Nate Champion was born in Texas, one of 19 brothers and sisters. He came up to Wyoming on one of the many cattle drives and decided to stay in the Powder River country. Now, this was the 1880s when the cattle business was still fairly profitable. In Wyoming, Nate first got work as a ranch hand for some of the larger beef outfits. Here he met and became acquainted with other Johnson County cowboys, including Oscar Jack Flagg and Orly Ranger Jones. Flagg had bought his own cattle and shared a brand with a few other cowboys named the Hat brand. Back then, owning your own cattle automatically prohibited you from working for any of the big ranches that were members of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, or WSGA. One of the largest ranches was the 76 Ranch, whose foreman was a British immigrant named Fred Hess. Hess was an educated man whose mannerisms and overall attitude could come off a bit hoity-toity to some of the other cowboys. But he was not the kind of guy you'd want to cross. He could throw down if need be. During the 1888 roundup, the EK brand, one of the largest still remaining in the county, hired Curtis Ed Spa as their foreman. Spa was new to the area, and Nate helped him get the lay of the land. According to Flagg, some of the other foremen told Spa who was blacklisted and who wasn't blacklisted but shouldn't be hired because, they're trouble. Spa then asked Champion about these supposed troublemakers, and Champion told him they'd been accused of branding mavericks, but they were hard workers and good men. Spa ended up hiring four of them, including Ranger Jones. Obviously, Jack Flagg couldn't be hired, he was on the blacklist, but he asked Spa if he could tag along just to look after his own herd of a few hundred cattle, and Spa agreed. These decisions ended up costing Spa his job at the end of the roundup. Flagg accused Hess of conspiring to get Spa fired and of just being an all-around shady guy, while Hess called Flagg and his friends a gang and accused them of all sorts of shenanigans. Flagg had also gotten into it with Mike Chauncey. Chauncey was the foreman of the CY brand, Senator Joseph Cary's own outfit, and during the 1889 roundup, Chauncey and Flagg ended up fighting over a yearling cow. Apparently, a whip might have been involved, but neither man would forget the fight. Point is, many involved in this situation hated each other on a personal level, even without all the cattle drama. Now, Nate wasn't as brash and outspoken as Flagg, but he still had a reputation as a guy you didn't push around, and two incidents in 1891 would bring matters to a head for him. Now, by this point, Nate owned about 200 cattle, a fraction of the thousands that occupied the range. The first incident happened during the spring roundup. Champion saw that a few of his cattle were mixed in with Mike Chauncey's herd and offered to get his out. Chauncey told him to not worry about it, he'd get Nate's cattle out for him. When Nate left, Chauncey took Nate's cows and ran them off towards the hills, which now meant days of having to track them down. According to Flagg, that, of course, vexed Nate, and he had some words with Chauncey over the matter. Chauncey never forgave him, though apparently afterwards he was very friendly. Apparently, Nate returned the favor and shooed off some of Chauncey's cattle as well. The second incident took place after the roundup, when Nate rented a cabin and moved his herd into the Hole-in-the-Wall country on the west side of Johnson County. A WSGA-affiliated member argued that Nate didn't have a right to graze there, even though nobody owned the land and Nate's herd was only a tenth of the member's herd. Remember, nobody pushes Nate Champion around. He'll graze his cattle where he wants to. For the cattle barons, this type of rebellious behavior couldn't be tolerated. It's time to make an example out of Nate Champion. By this point, Nate had rented a small one-room cabin with his roommate, Ross Gilbertson. The cabin had a door that was so low most men had to crouch to get in, and the cabin was so cramped the door couldn't open all the way without hitting the bedpost. On Sunday morning, November 1st, 1891, Nate and Ross slept in the cabin's bed. Nate briefly woke up and played with a cat. Nowadays, he probably would have watched a couple of YouTube videos. Maybe click the like button, hit the bell icon so he received notifications when his favorite channels posted new videos. Maybe he would have even subscribed. The button's down there somewheres. Nate had gone back to sleep when suddenly the door to the cabin flew open and two men entered with guns drawn. One of the intruders told them, "Give up, boys, we've got you." Nate asked them who they were and what they wanted, while acting all sneaky and reaching for his own revolver, hanging on a bedpost. The intruder again told him, "We've got you. You might as well give up." And with that, the shooting started. The intruder's first round was so close to Nate it showered his face with burnt powder and mortally wounded Nate's pillow. Nate returned fire as the intruder shot at him and missed. The men ran outside with Nate in hot pursuit. Nate later recalled, "The first thing I saw was a Winchester standing against the corner of the cabin, and another lying on the ground a few feet away. I took the first gun in my left hand, and just as I grasped it, a man jumped around the corner and threw down on me, but did not attempt to shoot. I jumped inside the door and fired a shot through the chinking of the cabin. When I got outside again, I saw a man going through the brush some distance from the cabin, but he disappeared before I had time to get a shot at him." Nate and Ross checked the area and found their assailants' staging camp nearby. Among the abandoned items was a bloody tarp. Months later in Idaho, Hiram Ijams, secretary of the WSGA, confided to George Dunning that 4 men had tried to kill Nate Champion in that cabin. Nate had shot one of the men up the coat sleeve and another through the ribs. That man is believed to have been Billy Likens, who was dead from his wound by the end of the year. Other men in Cheyenne confirmed the story to George. They explained to him how the original intent had been to hang Nate near the cabin and that the Winchester rifle that Nate had picked up and used belonged to Frank Canton. Nate, along with 2 friends, went searching up a nearby canyon for more evidence, where he located Mike Chauncey. Nate was able to persuade Chauncey to name the men who would come after him. In a month, at least one of the men who went with Nate and confronted Chauncey, John Tisdale, was dead, killed along the road south of Buffalo. Ranger Jones was also killed shortly before Tisdale, although his body wouldn't be found until after Tisdale's. It's believed at least part of the reason these men were targeted is because they knew who the assassins were that had tried to kill Nate Champion. These shootings put the entire country in a state of high alert, bordering on paranoia. The Johnson County Commission issued a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever killed Tisdale and Jones. In fact, on the same page of the Buffalo Bulletin from December 17, 1891, you can find the reward notice, the interview with Nate Champion, and the next column over, a sort of manifesto from the Northern Wyoming Farmers and Stock Growers Association. "We are opposed to such spirit and management of any corporation or enterprise as tends to oppress the people and rob them of their just rights. We are not enemies to capital, but we oppose the tyranny of monopolies." Even the weekly column written by the soldiers stationed at nearby Fort McKinney focused on the killings. In February, Nate Champion testified at Joe Elliott's preliminary hearing and identified him as one of the men who had tried to kill Champion. Joe couldn't pay his $5,000 bail and spent the next couple of months in jail. According to a local newspaper, Nate's persuasive testimony convinced nearly everyone that Elliott was mixed up in the affair or that he has a double whom he cannot get rid of any too soon for his own good. For the WSGA, the hit squad's failure to kill Champion meant a change in tactics. In the springtime, instead of a small team of killers, the stockmen would unleash a heavily armed mercenary force to eliminate any and all opposition in Johnson County. If the mercenaries, or invaders as they've come to be called, could get to Buffalo quickly, they could decapitate Johnson County's leadership in one fell swoop. Then they could install their own friendly government and finish picking off whatever resistance remained. It's an audacious plan, to say the least. This idea's origins can be narrowed down to 2 men, Frank Walcott and William Billy Irvine. Both men owned large neighboring cattle ranches in Converse County. The Johnson County invasion could be called these men's brainchild, which was then put into place by Hiram Ijams, the guy who recruited George Dunning. At the time, Ijams was the secretary of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, as well as the Wyoming Livestock Commission. Wolcott and Irvine certainly had help from other interested parties. A collection had been taken up and raised over $100,000 to fund the invasion. Other men in positions of power were able to assist in other ways. For example, in late March, a communique went out from the governor's office to all state militia units, ordering them to only take orders from the governor's office and nobody else, like, say, a local sheriff. Frank Canton, who had laid low out of state after a warrant had been issued for him, came back and had his $30,000 bond paid off by WSGA members. Joe Elliott also arrived in town after his bail was also paid off. Tom Smith, a former deputy U.S. Marshal who had connections in Texas, brought 25 hired Texans with him to Cheyenne. All that was needed was the final word. And so, after the plan was approved by the WSGA's membership, on the night of April 5, 1892, George Dunning found himself on a special private train along with over 50 men rolling north towards Johnson County. At Casper, the men disembarked and saddled their horses. Telegraph wires were cut so advance warning of the invaders' approach couldn't be given. The ride north was not an easy one. The invaders were caught in a late spring storm and questions arose about who was actually calling the shots. See, Major Wolcott thought he should be in charge. The whole thing was his idea. But apparently, it's tough to flex on a gang of hired killers. Dunning observed, on the morning of the 7th of April, the mob were called together and told that hereafter the Texas part of the mob would be in command of Tom Smith and the rest of the mob would be in command of Frank Canton, for the mob to obey orders and ask no questions. With that settled, the men rode towards a nearby friendly ranch to rest. Dunning says the Texas men were about played out. While there, they were paid a visit by Mike Chauncey, who reported that Nate Champion was currently staying at the KC Ranch, about 16 miles away. The invasion's leadership had a heated debate about what to do next. Their objective was Buffalo. That was where the county's leadership was. But on the other hand, he really wanted to kill Nate Champion. The invaders finally decided to quick go to the ranch, kill Nate, then head as fast as they could to Buffalo. They still had time and the element of surprise. They rode out that night, and before the sun was up on April 9th, the men took up positions around the KC Ranch. When Nate stayed there, the ranch consisted of a cabin and a stable south of the river along the main road.
George was part of that. There was two men in a cabin, and that seemed to be the first group. He realized that they were up to no good, the cattle barons, and so he tried to warn someone, the leader of the, I don't call them the killers, the leaders of the killers, made him get back to where he was not able to warn the people that were going to be killed.
As the invaders waited for a sign of life from the cabin, George had an idea. Why not just go up to the cabin and see if he was there? George was unknown in the area. He wouldn't raise any suspicion. Afterward, George told the Johnson County Sheriff he planned on alerting the men inside about the mob's presence. But when George brought the idea up to Wolcott and Canton, they said the idea was crazy. If there were any friendlies in the cabin, they were out of luck. Soon a man came out of the cabin and walked toward the river to get some water. He was quickly and quietly rolled up. A few minutes later, his partner, a younger man, also came out and was rolled up near the stable. Shortly afterward, a young cowboy, Reuben Nick Ray, stepped out from the cabin's doorway, apparently looking for the other two men. From the stable, a man named C.D. Brooks, known as the Texas Kid, fired the first shot, dropping Ray. As the rest of the mob opened fire, a small man was seen quickly grabbing Ray and pulling him inside the cabin. That man was Nate Champion. On April 9, 1892, Nate Champion would do two things that would cement his place in Western history. First, he would single-handedly hold off an attacking force that outnumbered him 50-1 for an entire day. And second, he wrote about it while it happened. Throughout the morning, the invaders traded shots with Champion, who was able to score hits on some of his opponents and kept everybody's head down. Every hour the invaders spent fighting Champion was another hour lost getting to Buffalo. Problem was, how soon would anybody find out about the fight? During a lull in the shooting, a wagon and rider were seen approaching from the south. It was Jack Flagg and his teenage stepson who were on their way to Douglas. As he got closer, he was recognized by the invaders. About 7 of the men mounted up and gave chase. Jack told his son to cut one of the horses loose from the wagon, and the two rode for their lives. Jack was able to keep his pursuers at bay by pointing his rifle at them, but he was reluctant to fire. He only had 3 rounds. The two made it 30 miles to friends and began spreading the alert about the siege at the KC. Meanwhile, the invaders made use of Jack's abandoned wagon. They loaded it up, pushed it next to the north wall of the cabin, and set it on fire. Before long, the cabin was engulfed in flames. Everyone knew what had to happen next. Either Champion was going to die in that cabin, or he was going to make a run for it. Through the smoke, the invaders saw Nate sprint from the cabin towards the south, armed with a rifle and revolver. He might have been trying to conceal himself in the smoke from the cabin while making his way towards a ravine. As he approached the road, 2 men opened fire on Nate. Nate shot back, but he took a hit. More men fired at him. The fight was over. Suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, Nate Champion finally collapsed. Somebody pinned a note on Nate's body that read, "Cattle thieves, beware." That's when someone noticed a small book on Nate's body. The men soon discovered that in the book's pages, Nate had documented his point of view of the siege while fighting off his attackers. A journalist with the group took the diary, but it's since been lost to history. Since then, the diary's existence and exact wording have become hotly controversial. The most common version of Nate Champion's diary is undoubtedly altered and embellished. A version published a couple weeks after his death is considerably shorter and lacks some of the artistic flourishes in the more famous version. Up with the shorter and probably more accurate version in this video's description. But I do think the longer, more common version serves a valuable purpose. Nate Champion's strength, grit, and determination were universally celebrated by his friends, and even grudgingly admired by his enemies. Even if it's not exactly historically accurate, Nate's published diary poetically eulogizes a man who went down swinging, fighting against all odds for his ideals, for his friends, his livelihood, even his own existence. And so, in that spirit, I present to you Diary of Nate Champion. Me and Nick was getting breakfast when the attack took place. Two men with us, Bill Jones and another man. The old man went after water and did not come back. His friend went out to see what was the matter, and he did not come back. Nick started out, and I told him to look out, that I thought that someone was in the stable and would not let them come back. Nick is shot, but not dead yet. He is awful sick. I must go and wait on him. It is now about 2 hours since the first shot. Nick is still alive. They are still shooting and are all around the house. Boys, there is bullets coming like hail. Them fellows is in such shape I can't get at them. They are shooting from the stable and river and back of the house. Nick is dead. He died about 9 o'clock. I see smoke down at the stable. I think they have fired it. I don't think they intend to let me get away this time. It is now about noon. There is someone at the stable yet. They are throwing a rope out the door and drawing it back. I guess it is to draw me out. I wish that duck would get out further so I could get a shot at him. Boys, I don't know what they have done with them two fellows that stayed last night. Boys, I feel pretty lonesome just now. I wish there was someone here with me so we could watch all sides at once. They may fool around until I get a good shot before they leave. It's about 3 o'clock now. There was a man in a buckboard and one on horseback just past. They fired on them as they went by. I don't know if they killed them or not. I've seen lots of men come out on horses on the other side of the river and take after them. I shot at the men in the stable just now. Don't know if I got any or not. I must go and look out again. It don't look as if there is much show of me getting away. I see 12 or 15 men. One looks like... I don't know whether it is or not. I hope they did not catch them fellows that run over the bridge toward Smith's. They are shooting at the house now. If I had a pair of glasses, I believe I would know some of those men. They're coming back. I've got to look out. Well, they've just got through shelling the house like hail. I heard them splitting wood. I guess they're going to fire the house tonight. I think I'll make a break when night comes, if alive. Shooting again. I think they will fire the house this time. It's not night yet. The house is all fired. Goodbye, boys, if I never see you again. Nathan D. Champion.